Good evening and welcome very, very much to Conversations. And on this evening's program, I'm happy to welcome to the program two women who can speak about Middle Eastern developments particularly, and with some particular reference to the situation as relates to our relationships with the country of Libya. And if I may, I'd like to introduce the two guests and get into a conversation. And if I may, on my far left is Ann Leggett. And Ann Leggett is an artist, and she's also a writer. Primarily, I think it's fair to say, and an artist. And she's also a representative. Maybe you can help me here, Ann. You're with an NGO or non-governmental organization at the UN. What is the name of it again?
The organization is the Federation of American Arab Organizations. But some of my political activity I do on my own as a sort of wheeler and dealer for peace.
All right, very good. Okay, fine. Thanks, and welcome very, very much. And on my immediate left is Dr. Barbara Nimre Aziz, who is an anthropologist and is a journalist. Has a program here in New York City on BAI, right, on a regular basis.
I've been working on WBAI now for 3 years.
Okay, okay, good, and welcome.
And I write also.
Okay, and you write as well. Okay, and both welcome very, very much to the program.
Thank you.
Things are moving along so quickly now. We did say we wanted to focus on this indictment that has been handed down against Libya and so forth, but that is within a broader context of the developments in the Middle East, and you cover that beat, as it were, in a certain sense,
all the
Barbara.
Time.
And I wonder, generally, we've had this Madrid peace conference that they've tried to call. We've had these developments that have been going on now. I wonder, the relationship between the United States and the Middle Eastern, the people of the Middle Eastern area, are things getting better or worse from your perspective in terms over the last year, 2 years, 5 years? What is the trending that you see as far as the United States and our leadership evolving policies that resonate to, in a long-term sense, the needs of the people of that area, and then in that sense resonate to our long-term interest in being, which would be in trying to find one where we could become in touch with them? What's your general sensing about the development of relationships between the United States and the Middle Eastern or the Arab world?
Well, I just was hanging on to your first part of that question, are things getting worse or better? It's very difficult to decide that, given the role the media plays in focusing on certain events in certain countries like Libya or Iraq or the Kurds at any particular time, and making it appear that war is about to break open. Or on other occasions, the attention, I think the undue attention given to the opening of the peace talks in Madrid and moving towards the fourth meeting in Washington, which ended about 10 days ago, where there was almost no coverage of events, as presumably they are moving closer and closer to more specific negotiations. The Middle East remains a kind of boogeyman, which I think the American media and the American administration uses to alarm people without any clear indication of what the United States policy really is in the region. The Americans say in general they want peace in the region. On the other hand, they keep raising a red flag and waving it at the press and the public, and Libya is an excellent example of this.
Yeah.
After now 3 years, the American administration has decided that there are 2 Libyans who are responsible for a bombing, in this case, of what is called the Lockerbie disaster, the plane. And America has asked for the extradition of 2 Libyans. This is illegal, one can say. Now, Libya can agree to, as anyone can, I mean, to a request to offer their 2 citizens to the United States or not. What Libya has done has said, okay, we will go to a neutral body, in this case the International Court in The Hague, and ask for a neutral or an even-handed investigation.
Yeah.
Now, the Americans are rejecting that.
Yeah.
But Libya has, as you know, taken legal steps to answer the accusation. This, I think, the court in The Hague is the proper place for it. That court will ask for papers from the United States and Britain and France, particularly the United States, is spearheading these accusations.
Right.
Whether they'll have cooperation, whether the press will give the international court its due and cover the investigation that has now begun there remains to be seen.
Or whether our administration really wants to go in that direction, or if that's their intention, or if they intend to use it in a certain sense, as it might be seen as in a certain sense as a sort of scapegoat kind of bogey, as you say. They've done it in the past. We bombed Libya.
In Libya itself.
Yeah, well, they will use not only Libya, but to a certain sense, I've heard some people say the Soviet Union has now gone into the background as far as the Red Scare, the enemy, as it were. And in the minds of many Americans, they're trying to make the Arabs in general, or maybe even Islam itself in general, a new sort of, in a certain sense, enemy that can arouse animosity among in a scapegoating psychological way against the enemy. The new enemy becomes Islam or Arabs, and particularly certain targeted countries of the Arab world. We certainly delivered great firepower down on the Iraqi people recently within a context that could be discussed, but Libya has been scapegoated in the past, haven't they, Ann?
Yeah, and is again. I think that there are two things that we might point out. There has already been considerable doubt about the U.S. So-called evidence against these Libyan guys. Remember, the story was told about some Palestinian individuals before. The accusation was that they placed a bomb in a suitcase onto a plane going from Malta to Frankfurt, from which it was transferred to the Lockerbie plane.
Lockerbie Flight 103, yeah.
And the Maltese flight was KM 180. The Maltese conducted an investigation, and on November 15th, 1991, they published the results, which was that there was no unaccompanied suitcase at all on that flight. Now, this has not been reported very much at all in the U.S. media, except on WBAI.
Right.
And a letter of mine to the New York Times, I know of no other media mention of it.
Although the Maltese government and the Maltese Airlines have specifically, clearly stated that there was no such baggage on that flight passed in Malta.
That really puts a big hole in the indictment that the United States is trying to bring down against these two people, or the country of Libya. And that was a real exhaustive, or not exhaustive, but a real serious investigation on the part of the Maltese government, and they found there was no baggage put on that Maltese flight to Frankfurt. So what does that do to the American indictment if that is the case? And if that is the case reported by the government of Malta, why isn't that being reported in our national media? Or what does the American government have to say about that report by the Maltese government? That's a very important development.
To my knowledge, it said nothing about it. But in terms of what the media is doing, I think one problem is that the media is has so brainwashed itself into thinking that the Libyans are hopelessly evil that they are unwilling to even pursue leads that might indicate that they are not guilty. Surely any large news organization could have obtained the Maltese documents in spite of the shyness that the Maltese felt. I understand they've been under some pressure. But a few private individuals managed to obtain those documents by fax, the facts of life these days. So it certainly wasn't impossible, and I think a lot of us are trying to get the word out. But one thing that really interests me very much in this story is that I was in Libya for most of the summer of 1991, and some very interesting things were happening. First of all, the Libyans were believing that a normalization of relations with the U.S. was right around the corner. Now, certainly, the Tripoli gossip mill is often over-optimistic, but I first heard it from a Japanese diplomat while I was waiting in Rome for a flight to Tripoli. And then I began hearing it from many, many people, Libyans and non-Libyans. At the same time, Libya and Egypt were moving closer and closer. To the extent that Egyptian farmers have been invited to settle on the land to be irrigated by the Great Man-Made River, which is an enormous water project, which Barbara can describe better than I can.
Yeah, okay, we'll let her. Yeah.
But before that, now, this was going on. Also, Libya had decided to become a nation of immigrants. The borders were open with all of the neighboring countries. And they had had quite a flood, which some Libyans regarded with mixed emotions. Yeah, they felt that they were being flooded with too many people too fast. They were making the same kind of complaints about immigrants that we New Yorkers have been making for the past 350 years. And one reason why they were doing that is that the birth rate had begun to drop. Due to urbanization, more opportunities for education, the entry of women into the workforce, which was very important. So many of the young people that I knew well, they were still unmarried 3 years after my previous trip, and these people were in their late 20s and early to mid-30s. So the closening of ties with Egypt, which appeared to be leading toward a merger, was very significant. And I wonder if it didn't have something to do with some curious switches in policy. First, here the U.S. was kind of using the carrot of better relations to, according to some observers, attract Libya to go to Madrid, which it did not do. Also among the French, remember the French had been accusing the Libyans of blowing up a plane over Niger, I believe. And that in spite of the fact that it happened just shortly after the peace treaty with Chad was signed, and so the Libyans and French were really on rather good terms. So you had one faction in France making a big deal of it, saying, yes, the Libyans are to blame, go after them. And another faction which was sending high-level missions to Libya and being quoted as saying that they want better relations with Libya, and they were even calling for an end to sanctions against Libya. Well, the U.S. made a switch, too, and we don't know quite why. Maybe you know more about it, Barbara.
Well, I want to come back to Egypt in a moment, but...
and this Man River project, too, she mentioned,
Yes. Which has to do with Egypt's food self-sufficiency as well as normalizing or improving neighborly relations. But much of the issue here, it's very difficult to know what U.S. foreign policy is in Libya.
Amen.
Very difficult.
In the Middle East, for that matter.
What we can see is that the media does not fulfill its role, and that's one of the reasons we are here. I'm not here to defend one country or another or to promote Libyan policy or U.S. policy. But what we have to look at is how the media seems to be supporting some kind of blockade on Libya. The same way they seem to be doing in the case of Iraq, and we're doing for the last 18 months or longer, certainly in that area. Libya is presented as a danger to all liberty-loving people. And it has very little credibility for various reasons, so that when it is presented in this way as a threat, and it excites the public, allowing the American government to do just about what it wants. So there is no careful investigation of Libya's position or even the American position.
Yeah, and it also takes people's mind away from some of the domestic problems that might do. It's a classic way of a government trying to gain support.
And then it reinforces an old image that was created a very long time ago about the Arab people and Islam being a threat to the entire world.
Right.
And it makes it appear that the entire area is unstable and also needing some kind of military action to force it in place. Now, Libya has been trying to answer the accusations against it. I mean, I'm sure Libya, like any country in the world, is not incapable of trying to manipulate certain actions, to put pressure here and there. Their relations with Britain are very bad, and with America. But they're trying to answer the accusations. And the important thing is that the media and the United States government is not allowing that to happen. There is no coverage in the Western press at all about the case going on in The Hague now and what Libya is trying to do. There is a Montreal Convention which arranged for countries internationally accused of violent acts to come forward, and that there would be arbitration and a place to submit facts and to hear the case. America is not, who is a signature to the Montreal Convention, and so is Libya. America and Britain are not allowing Libya to use this mechanism.
Yeah, and we've scapegoated Libya in the past. One will remember well that the only use, the outright overt use of military power by Mr. Reagan, much as he rattled the sword and so forth, was the attack against Libya in 1986. All will remember that.
I don't think
111 bombers coming from England and so forth. We bombed the home of Muammar Gaddafi. Seymour Hersh documented that it was an assassination attempt on the part of trying to assassinate him, and we killed Muammar Gaddafi's adopted daughter, Hannah, 18-month-old girl in her bed at night. Imagine if it was Amy Carter had been killed in the White House. We did this, and it was done on the basis of the fact that we said we had solid evidence that there was a discotheque bombing in Berlin, and that this was clear evidence that they were terrorists, and gave us the right to bring this mighty force against them. Subsequently, it was found out that they had not been the ones who had done this discotheque bombing in Berlin, so the rationale for which we bombed them was not there, but the reporting of that error on our part, and then that act of terrorism directed against the Libyan people at that time, was simply not reported in the press. It makes one realize that we're doing it. It's a classic, in a certain sense, scapegoating kind of pattern that we direct toward a country that seemed to be weak and off on the side and could be attacked, also partly because they have a progressive philosophy, perhaps, but I don't know.
I'm not sure that philosophy has anything much to do with it. I think that possibly there's this sort of central casting mentality that Gaddafi is a colorful person. You know, I think if he were a boring person, maybe Libya wouldn't make such a satisfactory scapegoat, you know, from a theatrical point of view. But it's a funny place to make a scapegoat of.
Could I interrupt you and bring us back to the economic factor? It's not a philosophy. I don't think it's Libya's philosophy. I think Libya, like Iraq, was economically self-sufficient. These are rich countries. Libya has only 4 million people. It's a large area, but it has a small population. It feeds and maintains itself very well. It doesn't need the United States. It doesn't provide also the market that the United States might want. Although this great man-made river project, which will cost by the end of the century $25 billion, which Libya is spending, most of it outside Libya, to Brown and Roots, a Texas-based company.
Yeah, why don't you explain that? That is a very, very huge thing where they're bringing huge amounts of fossil water from under the Sahara Desert to the North Shore, and I think it's just about the largest civil engineering project that is going on in the world
of its kind.
And it's going to bring, and water is becoming an important question so far as the Middle East is concerned, and here they're going to bring this fresh water
and water
to the North Coast.
Is important there also for expanding Libya. Libya is not a self-sufficient, self-producing country. Libya has to import food. I think it's shameful. It really ought not to.
Well,
Libyans are not
new
farmers.
Water, they'll be able to.
And this comes back to Egypt. Egyptians are farmers. There are millions of unemployed Egyptians. Egyptians are coming to Libya partly to cultivate land which is irrigated by the man-made river project now.
So there's a closer relationship between Egypt and Libya beginning to develop.
And there is a growing relationship. As Ann said, their borders have been opened, so there's free movement between their borders now.
They've actually borders with all the neighboring countries. I think they have, haven't they?
That was the case as
Tunisia,
of the summer
Chad,
of
and so forth. Yeah, right.
So a lot of people in need of work and in need of food are coming to Libya now. They can cultivate land which is newly irrigated by the river project, which was opened last August. Egypt has an interest in stabilizing relations and improving relations, really making more creative relations with Libya. So I think coming back to the current issue of Libya's role or not role, Libya's cooperation with the World Court, you notice in the Egyptian press, and this is the official press, Al-Ahram in particular, which is the party or the state newspaper, one can say. There are opposition papers in Egypt, but this is the official paper, is coming out repeatedly in the last 2 months talking about Libya's willingness to cooperate with the World Court, suggesting that Libya was not involved in the so-called Lockerbie disaster.
Right.
And nevertheless, whether or not it was involved, Libya has been cooperative, is offering to bring evidence to the World Court, is asking for the Europeans and the Americans to provide their evidence.
Yeah.
So I think Egypt's role in attempting to show that Libya is being reasonable here is very, very important.
Well, it's
Egypt has a lot to gain.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for Egypt because Egypt is right now totally dependent on American food.
Yeah, right.
And Egypt wants to develop a more independent economic policy.
Oh, that's really interesting, and she brought that up. But it brings it around.
And on the other hand,
and I wanted to bring it around to what you were saying, Ann, because I mean, in a certain sense, they've been reasonable all along. It's a little bit, if I may say so, even back at the time of the
Libya.
bombing. Yeah, reasonably so, having been attacked by the United States and being goaded by them and so forth. But it brings it. They've been like that. But it's a little bit like, when did you stop beating your wife kind of thing. Is they're making accusations of them that they use, and then it's like part of, again, that scapegoating thing that you were talking about, Ann. But I mean, go ahead.
One of the remarkable things, well, two comments that I'd like to make. What the Libyans get out of a closening relationship with Egypt, one that they see as even as a merger, they're even willing to give up a large slice of their sovereignty for survival at this point. When it was first contemplated, it was a matter of mutual interest on rather happier grounds. But now it becomes an issue of survival. That if they can move close enough to Egypt, then the U.S. will stop tormenting them. I hope they are right. I hope the U.S. won't start tormenting both Libya and Egypt at that point.
Well, excuse me, but America torments Egypt by holding it on a short string. If Egypt doesn't behave itself, the Americans cut off their food supply.
Well, the United States is trying to torment
it's another way. I'm sorry, go ahead.
But another curious aspect to this scapegoating of Libya is that the Libyans are... if there is any number one thing in their minds regarding the United States, it's a desire for better relations. Even if taking the gossip and the wishful thinking that I've encountered in my 3 visits, the second time I was there was a rumor going around that I was a secret emissary from the State Department there to improve relations, and I almost wept when I heard it, and I said, oh, I wish to God it had been true. I don't know why we're making enemies of people who would much rather not be our enemies, who would really like to get along well with us and discuss whatever differences arise in a civil manner. I find this very touching because we've made a point of being frightfully unjust and cruel to these people, and they keep coming back and forgiving us. Why can't we take advantage of this generous spirit on the part of the Libyans and do what they would really like to have us do?
Well, I don't know. It might be that we have this whole idea of this unipolar kind of world that was announced by the Defense Department. We're going to be the policemen of the world, where anyone who shows any kind of independence or isn't willing to, in a certain sense, come and kiss the hem of the leader of the greatest Western power in the world, and they're lining up all around the world to try and become sycophant to the United States around the world with that. Libya is one country that has, in a certain sense, being in a certain sense independent, has been able to stand up to that in a certain sense and say that they should have the right to their own independent national sovereignty and identity and so forth. This is a broader question so far as all of the Arab and Islamic peoples of the world are concerned.
I think the American, if there is any foreign policy implications here, the Americans and the British as well cannot tolerate states who are too independent.
It's a colonial
Economically,
attitude.
Indeed it is. Not only that, Libya is in a position to offer financial support to liberation struggles like the ANC. Do you remember when
Sure.
Nelson Mandela was here?
Yeah.
He was questioned, why are you a friend of Colonel Gaddafi, President Gaddafi? And that is one of many liberation struggles that the Libyans are supporting. They also support them morally very much. And Libya is in a position to define, to some extent, its own policy.
Yeah.
Libya was not in the Russian camp ever.
Yeah, I
Libya
know.
has kept far away
No, they
from
never-
Russia, but it also has kept far away from the United States.
Yeah, they've always.
in terms of-
He has always said that in the Soviet Union you had a state capitalism where all the control and ownership and power was vested in a Politburo small class. In the West, it's a monopoly capitalism where all the state power, power and wealth and power is vested in a relatively small class, and that they both need to be transformed, and that he, in a certain sense, is enforced with progressive forces that sees the need for major change in the world. There are many people within the United States that are at a very, very visceral level upset with the fundamental principles and structural problems by which our government operates. We have a candidate, Jerry Brown, running vociferously on that particular subject. Voter registration is down, voter participation, general alienation is down, and so there's a general opposition to the overall principles by which this country is operating, perhaps subverting some of the founding principles upon which it was formed. So somebody who will stand up and critique that rather than just line up and try to get some of that which Mazda might be able to grant is to be taken, looked at.
I don't think it's an ideological thing. I think, for one thing, the U.S. couldn't care less what Libya's ideology is. I'm not sure what it is myself. I think one of the things that's characteristic of Libya is that it's a very young country, and it hasn't figured out how it's going to interpret its ideology, if indeed it has one. And this is again, part of the problem of our perceptions of Libya. It is a different culture. The alleged craziness of the Libyans, and the media are forever saying that the Libyans, not just the colonel himself, but Libyans in general are crazy. A lot of this alleged craziness is the inevitable trial and error that comes when you're trying to figure out, you want to do things your way, but you're not quite sure how your way is, what your way is in a world that's changing very, very rapidly.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then they also had a revolutionary thing. It's only been a generation since the revolution. They came from great poverty. Great changes are going on. So there's tremendous problems. That's still no reason why we should allow our government as Americans to scapegoat these people who had suffered a Holocaust and had been very poor. And we could go on talking at great length, but we're running out of time. It's a tremendous, the final and ultimate tyranny is the time in the media, as you well know. So I'm sorry we run out of time. We have to do more programming on this. But may I just say thank you both very, very, very much for coming in, introducing the subject. And if I may, on my immediate left, Barbara Nimra Aziz, anthropologist and writer, and on my far left, Ann Leggett. She's a realist artist and has written beautiful works that she's done on Libya, incidentally, artistically, and as a writer and NGO representative at the United Nations. Happy to present those perceptions to you. We invite you to stay tuned. There will be more coming up momentarily on the same general topic area. That's it for now, but once again, thank you really very, very much for coming in.
Nice to be here.
Please stay tuned. We'll be coming right back. Thank you. Hope you may have enjoyed that discussion with Ms. Leggett and Aziz, and it's a very, very important subject. And I did want to just intervene here and say that we have an additional part of the program coming up in a minute, but excuse me, it's a little bit unusual. But we got in touch by telephone with one of the very leading international lawyers who have followed the Libya issue, and that being Francis Boyle. He's a professor of international law at the University of Illinois, at Champaign, Illinois, and he wasn't able to be here in New York, but we have made a telephone interview with him, and we're going to play that telephone interview along with a couple of shots and so forth of him from previous interviews we've done as far as the visual component. So set that up in the studio and run it now then, please. Thank you.
We're talking now by telephone with Francis Boyle, who is a professor of international law at the University of Illinois. And Francis, welcome very much to the conversation. It's good to talk to you out there in Illinois.
Nice to talk with you again, Harold, and thanks for having me on your program yet another time.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit different. We'll be doing it by telephone, but we did want to talk to you because you've written this extremely interesting memorandum of law concerning the Libya situation, which has been very, very troubling in these last few weeks and months. And I wonder, maybe you've been following the relationship between the United States and Libya, among other countries, for some time. Maybe before we go into some detail in this memorandum, you could give a little background for some of the viewing public to the situation as you see it in terms of international law historically between the United States over the last decade or two and the country of Libya, if you could, please.
Well, let's take it back a decade, since that's as long as I've been personally following it as opposed to just historical research. Mm-hmm. When the Reagan administration came to power, the first project that was authorized to be engaged in by the Central Intelligence Agency was a plan to overthrow the government in Libya, mm-hmm. and by all means possible. And throughout the 1980s, we just saw one provocation after another by the United States government against Libya, the use of military force, intervention into their territorial waters, concocting allegations that they were responsible for international terrorism.
Just sort of goading
things, one after another after another.
Yeah, just sort of goading them, really, right?
Well, even more so,
yeah.
not just goading them, but an attempt to attack them, to overthrow them,
yeah.
To isolate them.
And we did things that were going to try and elicit a response, and in due course, we pushed it so far that there was some response.
Well, we, as you know, in 1986, went over and bombed two helpless, defenseless Libyan cities, Tripoli and Benghazi.
Yes.
Killed about 75 innocent civilians, wounded approximately 240 innocent civilians.
Yeah.
I was over there. It was just shocking and indefensible.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing it happen all over again.
Mm-hmm.
I think this time, I hope that the American people are not going to allow themselves to be fooled yet another time by the disinformation being put out by the Central Intelligence Agency as to alleged Libyan involvement somehow in the Lockerbie bombing incident.
Yes, it's interesting, if I may, that the discotheque bombing in Berlin that had been the ostensible reason that we bombed originally in 1986 ultimately proved to be that it hadn't been Libya that had been responsible for that bombing that we used as a rationale for bombing their country.
That's correct. Libya had nothing to do with it. Even U.S. government officials admitted they knew it at the time. They just didn't care, and they manipulated charges of Libyan involvement.
And there's never
this bloodthirsty attack on Tripoli and Benghazi.
And there's never been an apology or anything of that sort.
No.
And they've just used that misinformation in a certain sense, scapegoated that country, and got very high public relations ratings behind that, didn't they?
Well, that's correct. 75% of the American people supported the bombing because they effectively had been lied to by their own government. The same thing's happening all over again now on the Lockerbie situation.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Just one last thing, if we could, and go right to the memorandum, is that Seymour Hersh had identified that as an attack upon Mr. Gaddafi himself, and in the attack on his residence, our bombers resulted in the death of his adopted 18-month-old daughter, correct?
Yes, I was over there, and I toured the Gaddafi home. They used the air conditioning ventilation shaft as the aim point for the bomb.
Good
they
Lord.
Knew that man was there that evening with his wife and his children. It was really a miracle that the whole family was not killed. The bomb came in the center of the home, and the family members were sleeping off on the sides.
Yeah.
And, so the whole center collapsed. And unfortunately, their 2-year-old adopted daughter, Hannah, a Palestinian refugee, was killed by a beam coming down out of the ceiling. And the others escaped with various types of physical and and psychological injury.
Another clear violation of international law on the part of the United States that the American citizenry should be aware of, and also might do well for us to be leery of some of these reports that have been coming over these recent months, which brings us up to the current situation, in particular this memorandum of the dispute that you've put together.
Well, during after the airplane was blown up at Lockerbie, of course, we had been told by the U.S. government sources that it was really Iran and Syria and a renegade Palestinian group operating out of the Bekaa Valley that was responsible for the destruction of the Pan Am jet over Lockerbie. I don't know if that's true or it's false. It could be true, it could be false. We really don't know. Generally, our intelligence services concoct whatever information they want to and blame whoever they want to for something of that nature. But as best as can be told from examining the public record, when Bush decided to go to war against Iraq, he also decided to try to get Hafiz al-Assad of Syria involved in that war against Saddam Hussein, and to some extent the Iranian cooperation too. And so Bush had the famous meeting with Hafiz al-Assad in Geneva, where, as best as anyone could tell, Bush probably promised Hafiz al-Assad that someone else would be blamed for Lockerbie. This is not to say that the Syrians did it. I don't know if they did it or who did it. But all of a sudden, sometime after that meeting, evidence began to emerge in the public record planted by U.S. and French intelligence sources that miraculously now Libya was responsible and no longer Syria, Iran, and the renegade Palestinian group. Well, it's interesting, if you go through all this evidence very carefully, you'll see that allegedly it originates out of Senegal. And it turns out, somewhat interestingly, that the same week that all this evidence supposedly came out of Senegal, although not reported in the U.S. news media, it was reported in the European news media, Senegal's public debts were rescheduled by the Paris Club at a highly preferential rate that they otherwise were not entitled to.
Interesting.
So I think it's kind of clear what happened here. And so for about the next year, you saw one leak after another trying to pin the blame on Libya and to throw off whatever blame might or might not be placed on Syria, the renegade Palestinian group, and Iran. And remember, too, at this time, Bush was trying to get release of U.S. hostages in Lebanon, and to do that, he certainly needed the cooperation of Syria and Iran.
So it certainly has all the earmarks of back to our favorite scapegoat.
Well, that's correct. Someone had to be blamed, and Libya was at the top of the list. They've always wanted to get rid of Libya and the leadership in Libya, and also to get access to Libyan oil.
Also to be able to stir up American sentiments, which they've helped to create, which is a very strong anti-Arab and even anti-Islamic sentiment that's been stirred up among the American people.
Well, we've seen that too since Reagan came to power in 1981. So what happened? The allegations then were officially announced last December on the third anniversary of the bombing of the plane. What did Libya do? Immediately, Libya offered to submit the entire matter to the International Court of Justice.
Which is the appropriate thing you would consider.
That's exactly right. Libya also immediately offered to submit the entire dispute to an international arbitration tribunal or to an impartial international panel for the investigation of these allegations. All of these offers that were made by Libya in good faith were rejected by the United States and the United Kingdom summarily, just right out of hand, just absolutely no attention at all to all the efforts that Libya made to try to resolve these disputes.
Yeah, and if I may, you're the international lawyer here, but the efforts that Libya were making was in accord with a Montreal protocol and other of the body of international law that would deal with these kind of international disputes that people have agreed to?
That's correct. In 1971, there was concluded the Montreal Sabotage Convention that deals with acts of sabotage committed against aircraft. Libya, the United States, the United Kingdom, and France are all parties, as well as all the members of the UN Security Council and a fairly large number of states in the world. If you read the convention, you will find out that Libya has handled the allegations in strict accordance with the terms of the Montreal Convention. The convention, once the allegations were made, they required Libya to take these two individuals into their custody and launch an investigation into these charges, which Libya has done. Libya then said to the U.S. and the U.K., all right, give us the evidence you have so that we can conduct our investigation. So far, the U.S. and the U.K. have refused to give Libya whatever evidence they have, and in that regard have breached their obligations under Article 11 of the Montreal Convention to cooperate with any state that is initiating such an investigation.
Makes one suspicious of they're trying to stir up again the emotions of the American people, perhaps.
That's right. What do they have to hide, I think, is the point. Where is the so-called evidence? In any event, the U.S. and the U.K. then tried to spearhead the UN Security Council to take steps to condemn Libya. And just before the Security Council was to meet the Friday before, Libya formally invoked Article 14 of the Montreal Sabotage Convention and demanded that the entire dispute it had with the United States and the United Kingdom over the Lockerbie bombing be submitted to international arbitration, an international arbitration tribunal, as required by the Montreal Convention. So sent separate notes to both governments, and then the next day circulated a letter to that effect to all the members of the United Nations Security Council, indicating that they had invoked Article 14 of the Montreal Sabotage Convention and demanded international arbitration as was their right.
And yet they've run into some difficulty within the Security Council and the United Nations.
The UK paid absolutely no attention at all to those two notes. To the best of my knowledge, they never bothered to respond. They convened a meeting of the UN Security Council to condemn and sanction Libya. They were unable to get a resolution that condemned or sanctioned Libya.
And even used language, if I may, Francis, used language about that hinted at, if not outright said, that it might be necessary to use violence or military action if necessary.
Well, that was the insinuation.
Yeah.
The final language itself really did nothing except to request that Libya cooperate with the Security Council on this matter. And of course, Libya has attempted to cooperate all along in pursuing any means for the peaceful resolution of this dispute.
Yes.
During the course of the debates at the Security Council, both the U.S. and the U.K. rejected Libya's demand for arbitration and even said that as far as they're concerned, they don't really care at all about the Montreal Convention. They didn't think it applied, and they weren't going to pay any attention to it.
Well, they had snubbed their nose at international law in the case of Nicaragua in the past, hadn't they?
Well, that's exactly right, and the same thing was being done here. So in light of that, then, Libya began to consider suing the United States and the United Kingdom in the International Court of Justice, as is their right under the same Article 14 of the Montreal Sabotage Convention. The convention provides that if arbitration doesn't work, then the grieving party has a right to take the matter to the World Court. And on March 3rd, 1992, Libya filed legal papers, what's known as an application, instituting legal action against the United States and the United Kingdom in the International Court of Justice on the basis of the Montreal Sabotage Convention.
Seems an entirely appropriate thing for them to do.
Well, that's exactly right. Yeah. And there were 3 points that they were made. It's a fairly complicated document. I won't get through all of it, but the 3 points were, 1, Libya asked the World Court to adjudge that Libya had complied with its obligations under the Montreal Convention in the handling of the Lockerbie allegations. And in my opinion, that is exactly what Libya has done. 2, Libya requested the World Court to rule that the United States and the United Kingdom have violated their obligations under the Montreal Convention in the handling of the Lockerbie allegations. And then 3, Libya requested the World Court to take steps to make sure that the United States and the United Kingdom do not adopt unilateral or multilateral measures that will coerce or threaten or use force against Libya for the resolution of this dispute.
And this is something, again, that there's a strong precedent for in the body of international law itself.
Well, that's correct. And, you know, it's a basic principle of law that once a matter has been submitted to a court, the parties are to do nothing that would prejudge or prejudice or interfere with the ability of a court to render a decision in the case.
Yes.
But in this instance, of course, the U.S. and the U.K. were threatening to use military force yet again against Libya. And so Libya asked the World Court to indicate measures of provisional protection on behalf of Libya against the United States and the United Kingdom to prevent a military attack or threats or use of military force against Libya.
Certainly is easy to understand given the history.
Given the history of 10 years of this, or take other types of steps or measures that were going to interfere with the court's ability to adjudicate on Libya's claims and rights under international law. The World Court has set a hearing date of March 26th, that is next week.
Yes, right, as we talk
now. On Libya's request for provisional measures. And the last I heard, the United States and the United Kingdom have indicated that they will appear to argue their cases.
That would be a hopeful sign then if they do come to that position.
Well, it would be.
Rather than resorting to unilateral actions as they've done precipitously in the past.
That's correct. That's correct. So what Libya is trying to do is create some type of international forum that would allow for the proper airing of these allegations that, in my opinion, are unjustified against them, and also to clear the air on the matter, and then to head off another military attack against Libya on specious grounds that were just as ridiculous, unfair, and unjustified as all the grounds used throughout the 1980s by the Reagan administration.
Yeah, right. That's the thing, and it's also, if we might just think in a broader sense, and some of the other members of the Security Council, as you note in your memoranda or in your paper, that it's important that we move away from just a rule of the jungle or some notion of power makes right, and that we move towards some means by which the nations can use the body of international law as a way of dealing with one another rather than just the law of the jungle of might makes right. We really do. It's not just an idealistic prescription. It's one that has practical ramifications, because that principle could be turned against others, some of whom might be tempted to vote or to go along with the United States in the direction they've been attempting to go, if you follow what I'm saying.
Well, Harold, I think that's what the New World Order is all about. It's the Bush administration and the Pentagon deciding that the United States government is going to rule the world. And we saw last week this internal Pentagon document that has been approved by Secretary of Defense Cheney, basically saying that the Pentagon will take steps to make sure that there is only one superpower in the world. Well, this sounds and looks to me very similar to Adolf Hitler's promulgation of a new order for Europe. And I think all we have to do is look what happened to the people of Iraq, where 250,000 people have been wantonly slaughtered and exterminated by the Pentagon, to get some indication of what this New World Order is all about.
Yeah, so yes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And I think that it's really up to all American citizens who don't want to see this happen, whether Democrats or Republicans, liberal or conservatives, to stop this, to stop the implementation of this program, to stop the continuing economic sanctions against Iraq and the genocide of Iraqi children, to stop what is clearly a plan to engage in military action against Libya and engage in the large-scale threat and use of military force against countries that the United States government has disagreements with.
Or even given the fact of the way they've acted, it may show that there may be knowledge on the part of people within the governments of the United States or the United Kingdom that Libya was not responsible for that Lockerbie bombing?
I think that large numbers of officials in the United States government know full well that Libya had nothing to do with this, and indeed, even if you read in the press, you will find out that large numbers of individuals who have been following the Lockerbie bombing catastrophe express grave disbelief that Libya was somehow behind this. I think the relatives of the victims know full well that they are being lied to by the Bush administration on this matter, that all of a sudden Libya gets blamed at the last minute when it's politically expedient to exonerate everyone who had been blamed for the last 3 years. And again, I'm not saying who did it. We don't know exactly who did it.
But we might
I think we can say the Libyans didn't do it, and they're being brought in at the last minute here.
There's also
a very convenient scapegoat.
Yeah, and there's also been some allegations, I read, that if I may, the indictment had come down against two people who were, two Libyans who apparently had sent a bag from Malta, and there have been indications that there was no unaccompanied baggage from the flight that went from Malta to Frankfurt and supposedly was transferred on to London, which the basis or the guts of the argument against which the United States has tried to advance is sort of questioned by the official representation of the Maltese government, no?
That's correct. Air Malta launched an investigation of these allegations and concluded and put out a statement last November that the U.S. government had that there was no unaccompanied baggage from Malta to Frankfurt, which, if true, certainly would exonerate these two individuals who were alleged to have done whatever they did in Malta. Personally, I don't think these individuals, were responsible at all. They're just convenient scapegoats for one way or the other. And that statement by Air Malta was corroborated by an official statement by the Maltese government.
All of which is things that American citizens, given the background to this, really should be taking heed of. And don't you think that the media, some of the establishment media, let's say beyond, cable television and other things, some of the established media really ought to be picking up on the dimensions of this story?
What concerns me now is Bush is in a very difficult re-election campaign, and as we know, all presidents, whether Democrats or Republicans, who are in a tough re-election campaign, have a tendency to lash out and use military force against some unsuspecting country in the third world that they can very easily beat up upon. And it's not clear if Bush is going to use military force against Libya or against Iraq. Right now, it seems Iraq is a more likely candidate than Libya. I would just hope that this time the American people wake up and say, enough is enough. I notice even, Pat Buchanan from the Republican right wing is saying things like this. So, I hope that, your listeners out there realize that this is a nonpartisan type criticism that I'm making here.
And then just one last observation, sorry we're running short of time, but is that if and as the economy deteriorates, the leadership, often it's a classic, isn't it, from history, that they will try to find some foreign scapegoat to cover up for economic difficulties that the people are feeling, and there certainly has been a great deal of that manifest among the American people, and some people think that might even be getting worse, which makes the climate all the more ripe to try and find some foreign enemy that they could get the stirrings of so-called patriotism in order to bring the country together.
I think that's right. I think this is responsible for a lot of the Japan bashing that we have seen. It's responsible for a lot of the anti-Arab, anti-Muslim hysteria that we've seen, where the people who have been running the economy into the ground and down the toilet for the last 11 years are now trying to pin the blame somewhere else instead of directly on themselves.
Again,
I'm a former tax lawyer, and I can tell you that Bush's so-called economic program is a joke. It's smoke and mirrors. You don't restore an economy by by tax gimmicks, deductions, and credits that poor people and middle-class people use.
It's a very volatile kind of situation, and I want to just say we're going to try and let some of the people know about this memorandum of the law, which you put out on February 21 of this year, 1992. And I'm sorry we go on talking at great length, but we're running out of time. We only have so much time here on the air. But I really thank you very much for sharing some of your thoughts here with the cable audience in New York. And it's like always, it's good to talk to you, Francis.
Well, it's good to talk to you, Harold.
And we're going to try and make these people, let the people be aware, if we can, through the television medium, of this very succinct and precise memorandum that you've put together, which summarizes this so very well.
Thank you very much.
Okay, once again, thanks again, Francis. And in the audience, we would remind you it's been your pleasure to have the perceptions of Francis Boyle. He's professor of international law at the University of Illinois in Champaign, Illinois, and happy to have been able to bring you his perceptions. Once again, Francis, thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
As the Israelis generally do, and that is to take punitive military action.
We're happy to be speaking with Admiral Stansford Turner, who is the author of the new book, Terrorism and Democracy. And Admiral Turner, welcome very, very much to the program. Interesting speech that you gave to Ben's. We're going to try and give the cable audience some of outtakes from that interview. One part, from that speech, one part of your book, and one of the things that you and I have discussed, is that issue of Libya that is mentioned in your book as having been the one instance of the United States under Mr. Reagan actually bringing firepower to bear upon another country on the basis of the assumption that there had been bombing done of a discotheque in Germany, in Berlin. The Libyan government has said categorically that they were not involved with that. The intelligence community in the United States said that they have knowledge that they were, but that knowledge has never been clearly made available to the American public, perhaps in the rationale that it can't be made public without violating security procedures and so forth. It had been reported in the press that it had actually been an act of Syria, and there have been reports way in the back of the press after the initial attack against Libya that it had not been Libya that was the culprit, as it were, that Libya was falsely attacked. And if Libya had been falsely attacked in that case, would that have been an act of state-supported terrorism by the United States? And could you address yourself to the fact that large powers as well as lesser powers can act in what would be seen in a terrorist context?
Well, I think I tried to make it clear that I was not saying that the Libyans conducted the act, and I don't believe the administration has ever said that they conducted the act, but that they were aware of it, and therefore they were complicit in it. And I think that was adequate justification for the president's action.
Hope you may have enjoyed these programs having to do with Libya. It's the current situation as far as Libya is concerned. It's an extremely volatile situation, and one that we all have an interest in trying to understand better. Seems to me the guests this evening have helped us to illuminate those issues. Happy to have been able to bring these to you, and of course we on Conversations invite you to tune in again next week. I'm not here with Francis Boyle to shake his hand and thank him for coming in, but I do thank him for coming to us via telephone, and hope that you may have found his thoughts succinct and relevant to the issues. Again, thank you very, very much for viewing, and we on Conversations invite you to tune in again next week. That's it for now, so we'll see you next week. Thank you very much.
Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations 40 years ago, may not be a legally binding document. It is rather a promise made by all the members of the United Nations to the people of the world. We at Amnesty International believe that the governments who have adopted the Declaration have a moral responsibility to keep that promise.
Write Amnesty International, Post Office Box 3713.